The winter of 1888 in Ravens Hollow, Vermont, was of the latter kind. It was a season when the world seemed to hold its breath, when the birds vanished from the trees and the creek froze so deep it cracked the stones in its bed. But the silence wasn't just natural. It was something else, something heavy, something that started in a small isolated farmhouse at the edge of the Blackwood Forest and spread outward like a stain on a white cloth. Before we walk up the frozen path to the Vance door, make sure you are subscribed. We are here to uncover the history that hides in the dark. Leave a comment below. What is the longest you have ever spent in silence? And did you start to hear things that weren't there? Let's begin. On the afternoon of February 12, 1888, the sky over Ravens Hollow was the color of bruised iron. John Abernathy, a man of 60 winters, sat on the seat of his coal wagon, his beard crusted with ice. His mule, a stubborn beast named Bess, plodded forward, her hooves breaking through the crust of snow with a rhythmic crunch that was the only sound in the valley. John was tired. He wanted his fire, his pipe, and his wife's stew, but he had one last delivery. The Vance place, the Vance farm, sat at the very end of the valley, nestled against the granite cliff that marked the beginning of the true wilderness. It was a lonely spot, even in summer, but in winter, it felt like the edge of the world. John knew the family. He had known Arthur Vance, a good man who worked himself to death trying to pull crops from the stony soil. And he knew Elara, Arthur's widow. A woman of quiet dignity, with eyes that always seemed to be looking at something far away. Since Arthur's death the previous autumn, John had made it a point to check on her, to bring a little extra coal, a bag of sugar, a toy for the children. The children. Thomas, 12 years old and already trying to be the man of the house. Mary, 10, with her mother's dark hair, and baby Leo, barely 2, a loud, lusty child whose cries usually echoed across the yard. But today, as the wagon crested the final hill, there was no cry. There was no smoke rising from the chimney to greet him. The house sat dark and silent, a black shape against the white snow. "Whoa, Bess," John muttered, pulling the reins. He sat there for a long moment, listening. The wind hissed through the bare branches of the oak tree by the gate. A crow called once, harsh and flat, then fell silent. The yard was undisturbed. A fresh snowfall from 2 days ago lay smooth and perfect, like a sheet pulled over a sleeping face. No footprints led to the woodpile. No tracks led to the privy. It was as if the house had been dropped from the sky into a sea of white. John climbed down. His knees popped. He walked to the gate, pushing it open. It squealed on rusted hinges, a sound that seemed shockingly loud in the stillness. He walked up the path. He saw the windows. They were shuttered, not just closed, but boarded. Rough planks of pine had been nailed across the frames, the nail heads bright and new against the weathered gray clapboard. Why would she board the windows? The storm shutters were sturdy enough. This looked desperate, like a barricade. John reached the porch. He stamped the snow from his boots, a habit of politeness he couldn't shake even here. He raised his gloved fist and knocked on the heavy oak door. The sound was dull, swallowed instantly by the wood. "Mrs. Vance?" he called out. "Elara, it's John Abernathy. I've got your coal." He waited. He strained his ears. He thought for a second he heard a sound from inside, a soft scuff like fabric dragging on floorboards. "Thomas?" he tried. "Mary, you kids in there?" Silence. John tried the latch. It was locked. That sent a prickle of unease down his spine. In Ravens Hollow, locks were for storehouses and banks, not homes. Not in the day. He stepped off the porch and walked around the side of the house, peering at the boarded windows. He saw something stuck in the cracks of the siding. He pulled it out. It was a scrap of red ribbon. Mary's hair ribbon. It was frozen stiff, bleached by the sun. He walked to the back door, locked. The kitchen window was shuttered, but there was a knothole in one of the planks. John leaned close, putting his eye to the hole. It was pitch black inside, but the air drifting out through the cracks. That was what stopped him. It wasn't the smell of wood smoke. It wasn't the smell of cooking. It was a smell he recognized from the war, from the field hospitals. It was the smell of sickness, sweet, cloying, and heavy. The smell of laudanum and stale air and unwashed bodies. And beneath it, faint but sharp, the copper tang of something else. John backed away. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He ran back to the wagon. He didn't leave the coal. He climbed up, whipped the reins, and turned Bess around. The mule seemed eager to leave, her ears flat against her head. As they rattled down the track, John looked back once. He saw the house receding into the gray twilight, and he saw, or thought he saw, a face at the attic window. A pale white oval pressed against the glass, watching him go. To understand the horror of that February afternoon, we must rewind. We must look at the months leading up to the silence. We must look at the slow, agonizing disintegration of Elara Vance. In October of 1887, Arthur Vance died. It was a stupid, pointless death. A rusted nail, a scratch on the leg, a fever that wouldn't break. Elara sat by his bedside for 3 days, wiping his brow, listening to his delirium. Arthur talked about the cold. Even as his body burned with infection, he shivered. "The ice is coming, Elara," he whispered. "Close the door. Don't let it in." When he died, something in Elara broke. It wasn't a loud break. It was a hairline fracture in the foundation of her mind. She buried him. She stood at the grave in her black dress, her face as still as stone. The neighbors whispered about her strength. "She's a rock," they said. "She's holding it together for the children." But Elara wasn't holding it together. She was holding it in. In November, the first snow fell. It was early, heavy. Elara watched it from the kitchen window. To anyone else, it was just weather. To Elara, it was an enemy. It was the thing Arthur had warned her about. She began to prepare, not just for winter, but for a siege. She went to the general store. She bought flour, beans, salted pork. She bought enough to last 6 months. Mr. Abernathy helped her load the wagon. "Expecting a blizzard, Elara?" he joked. Elara didn't smile. "The world is getting colder, John," she said. "We have to be ready." She went to the apothecary. Dr. Webb, a man who dispensed pills and advice with equal carelessness, saw her come in. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "you look tired." "I can't sleep," she said. "The wind is too loud." "I have something for that," Webb said. He reached onto the shelf and pulled down a brown bottle. "Soothing syrup. It's for teething babies mostly, but a tablespoon will help an adult rest. It quiets the nerves." Elara looked at the bottle. Opium, alcohol, chloroform. "Give me a case," she said. "A case?" Webb raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of sleep, Elara." "There are 3 children," she said, "and the nights are long." Webb sold it to her. He didn't ask why a mother would need to sedate 3 healthy children. He marked it in his ledger. Vance, 12 bottles, paid in cash. Back at the farm, the world began to shrink. Elara pulled Thomas out of school. "He is needed at home," she told the teacher, Miss Gable. "He has a bright mind," Miss Gable protested. "He could go to university." "His mind won't keep him warm," Elara said. She pulled Mary from the choir. She stopped taking Leo to town. She brought them inside and she locked the door. The diary found later gives us a window into those months. It was written in a ledger book, in Elara's precise looping script. November 20th. The trees are bare. They look like skeletons, hands reaching for the house. I caught Thomas looking out the window. I told him to step away. If you look at the cold, it sees you. December 2nd. Mary is coughing. It's a dry cough. Arthur coughed like that. I gave her the spoon. She slept for 14 hours. She looked so peaceful. No pain, no fear, just stillness. December 25th. Christmas. We didn't light the tree. Fire attracts attention. We sat in the dark and I told them stories about summer. Leo cried for his father. I gave him the spoon. He stopped crying. The children were confused at first. They asked why they couldn't go out. They asked why the windows were covered. "It's for your safety," Elara told them. "There are wolves in the woods. There are things that want to take you." She wasn't lying to them. In her mind, the winter was a wolf. The cold was a predator, and she was the only barrier between her, children, and the teeth of the world. Thomas tried to fight it. He was 12, on the cusp of manhood. He remembered his father. He knew how to chop wood. "I can go out, Mama," he said one morning in January. "We need wood for the fire." "No," Elara snapped. "We don't need fire. Fire burns. Fire consumes. We need blankets. We need sleep." "But it's freezing in here," Thomas argued. Elara looked at him. Her eyes were huge, dark pupils swallowing the blue. She touched his cheek. Her hand was ice cold. "I will make you warm," she promised. "I will make it so you never feel cold again." That night, she doubled the dose. By February, the house had ceased to be a home. It was a cocoon. The furniture was pushed against the walls. The rugs were nailed over the cracks in the floor. The air was stale, recycled, heavy with the breath of 4 people living in the dark. Elara moved through the rooms like a sleepwalker. She stopped eating. She fed the children, but she took only water and the syrup. She began to hear things. The wind wasn't wind anymore, it was voices, Arthur's voice. "Save them, Elara," the voice whispered from the chimney. "Save them from the pain, save them from the hunger. The world is cruel, life is suffering. End the suffering." She looked at her children. They were thin, pale. They spent most of their days in a drugged stupor, waking only to drink broth and the syrup before drifting back into the gray fog of the opiate. "They are fading," she wrote in the diary on February 10th. "The world is eating them slowly. I cannot watch them fade. I have to fix them. I have to freeze them in this moment while they are still pure, while they are still mine." She made her decision on the morning of the 12th. It was a ritual, a ceremony of love and madness. She bathed them. She used the last of the warm water from the stove. She washed Thomas's hair. She braided Mary's pigtails. She cleaned Leo's tiny fingernails. She dressed them in their Sunday best. Thomas in his suit, Mary in her blue dress, Leo in his white christening gown. "Where are we going, Mama?" Mary asked groggily. "Are we going to church?" "Yes, my darling," Elara said. "We are going to a place where the angels sing." She took them upstairs to the big bedroom, the master bedroom. She put them all in the great feather bed. "It's a slumber party," she said. "We are all going to sleep together." She went to the kitchen. She took the last 3 bottles of the syrup. She poured them into a bowl. She mixed in sugar. She carried the bowl upstairs. "Drink this," she said. "It's the special medicine. It will make the cold go away." Thomas hesitated. He looked at the dark liquid. He looked at his mother's face. "It smells funny," he said. "It's strong," Elara said. "Like your father. Drink it for Papa." Thomas drank, then Mary. Then she fed Leo with a spoon. She lay down beside them. She held them as the drug took hold. She watched their breathing slow. She watched their eyes flutter and close. She watched the tension leave their faces. Thomas stopped shivering. Mary stopped coughing. Leo stopped whimpering. They drifted into the deep, dark water of the overdose. Their hearts slowed. And then silence. Elara checked their pulses, nothing. She checked their breath, nothing. She didn't scream, she didn't tear her hair. She felt an immense, crushing relief. "Safe," she whispered, "safe from the winter." She arranged their hands, she smoothed the quilt, she kissed their cold foreheads. Then she went downstairs. She sat in the rocking chair facing the door, and she waited. She knew someone would come. The world always intrudes. The coal man, the sheriff, the tax collector. She waited for 2 days. When John Abernathy knocked, she heard him. She held her breath. She didn't want him to wake the babies, but she knew he wouldn't give up. She knew he would go to the sheriff, and she was right. Sheriff Silas Graves was a man who had seen too much of the world's ugliness to be easily rattled. He had been a soldier in the Union Army. He had seen battlefields. But as he rode up the track to the Vance farm on the morning of February 13th, he felt a fear he hadn't felt since Antietam. It was the silence. He rode with his deputy, Caleb. They didn't speak. The horses seemed nervous, tossing their heads, fighting the bit. They reached the yard. Graves tied his horse to the rail. He checked his revolver. "Stay here," he told Caleb. Graves walked to the porch. He saw the boarded windows. He saw the lack of footprints. "Mrs. Vance," he shouted. "Sheriff Graves, open the door." He waited. The house stared back at him, blind and mute. He drew his gun. He walked to the door. He tried the latch, locked. He stepped back and kicked the door near the lock. The wood splintered. The door swung inward, banging against the wall. Graves stepped into the gloom. "Elara?" His eyes adjusted to the dark. The smell was overpowering now. It caught in his throat. He saw her. She was sitting in the rocking chair. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her hands. "Elara," Graves said softly. She looked up. Her face was gaunt, skeletal, but she was smiling. "Shh," she whispered. "They are resting." "Who is resting?" "The children. The winter tried to take them, Silas, but I tricked it. I hid them." Graves lowered his gun. "Where are they?" She pointed to the ceiling. Graves walked past her. He climbed the stairs. The wood creaked. He felt like an intruder in a tomb. He reached the bedroom. The door was closed. He pushed it open. The room was freezing. The light filtering through the cracks in the boards illuminated the bed. He saw them. 3 small shapes under the quilt. He walked to the side of the bed. He reached out and touched Thomas's face. It was ice. Graves recoiled. He stumbled back into the hallway, gasping for air. He had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. He went back downstairs. He looked at Elara. She hadn't moved. She was still smiling, that terrible, peaceful smile. "What did you do?" Graves whispered. "I saved them," she said. "I stopped the time. Now they will never grow old. They will never be sad. They will never be cold again." Graves arrested her. She didn't fight. She walked out into the snow, humming a lullaby. The trial of Elara Vance was not a trial in the traditional sense. It was a public reckoning, a theater of grief played out in the drafty county courthouse of Ravens Hollow. The snow outside piled high against the windows, muffling the sounds of the town, as if even nature wanted to hush the proceedings. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool and damp tobacco and the murmurs of a community trying to process the unthinkable. They had known Elara. They had bought eggs from her. They had seen her in church. How could the woman who baked bread for the harvest festival be the same woman who had poisoned her children with cold calculation? Sheriff Silas Graves sat at the prosecution table, his hat in his hands. He looked tired. He hadn't slept since the day he walked into that bedroom. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the 3 small mounds under the quilt. He saw the frost on Thomas's eyelashes. He heard the silence. The evidence box sat in front of him. The empty bottles of soothing syrup, the diary, the children's Sunday shoes. It seemed too small a collection to explain the magnitude of the loss. Elara sat in the dock. She wore the same gray dress she had worn on the mountain, though it had been washed. Her hair was combed and pinned back, revealing the sharp angles of her face. She looked frail, breakable. but her eyes remained unsettlingly clear. She watched the proceedings with a detached curiosity, as if she were watching a play about someone else's life. When the judge, Magistrate Orson Thorne, asked her to rise, she did so with a grace that made the women in the gallery weep. "Mrs. Vance," Thorne said, his voice heavy with the gravity of his office, "you are charged with 3 counts of murder. How do you plead?" Elara looked at him. She tilted her head slightly like a bird listening to a distant sound. "I plead safe," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried to the back of the room. "Safe is not a plea, madam," Thorne said gently. "Guilty or not guilty?" "Not guilty of murder," Elara said. "I did not murder them. I preserved them. You don't punish a librarian for keeping the books from the rain, do you? You don't punish a gardener for covering the roses before the frost." A ripple of unease went through the crowd. This was not the raving of a madwoman. This was the logic of a mind that had constructed a perfect, terrifying alternative reality. The prosecutor, a young man from the state capitol named Mr. Sterling, rose to present the case. He picked up the diary. He read the entries aloud, his voice rising and falling with dramatic flair. He read about the cold being a thief. He read about the stillness is heat. He painted a picture of a woman driven mad by isolation and drug addiction, a woman who had hallucinated a threat and destroyed her family to escape it. "This was premeditated," Sterling argued, pacing before the jury. "She bought the poison in bulk. She boarded the windows to hide her crime. She planned this massacre with the same care she used to plan her garden." But when Sheriff Graves took the stand, the narrative shifted. He described the house, he described the smell, and then he described the feeling. "It wasn't just madness," Graves said, looking at Elara. "She was afraid, terrified, not of the winter, of something else." "Of what, Sheriff?" Sterling asked. "I don't know," Graves admitted. "But when I was in that house, I felt it too. A pressure, like the walls were closing in, like something was watching from the dark." The jury deliberated for less than an hour. The verdict was never in doubt, guilty by reason of insanity. Elara Vance was sentenced to indefinite confinement at the Greystone Asylum for the Criminally Insane, a fortress of stone located 50 miles south. As the bailiffs led her away, Elara stopped. She looked at Sheriff Graves. She smiled that same beatific smile. "You should have let them sleep, Silas," she whispered. "You woke them up, and now they are cold. They will come looking for warmth." She was taken away in a carriage with barred windows. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The monster was gone. The chapter was closed, but the book wasn't finished. The Vance house sat empty at the end of the valley. No one would buy it. No one would rent it. The bank foreclosed, but even the bankers stayed away. It became a blight on the landscape, a gray, rotting tooth in the mouth of the mountain. The shutters banged in the wind, the boards on the windows began to rot and fall away, revealing the dark glass beneath like unblinking eyes. And then the story started. It began with the children of Raven's Hollow. Children are sensitive to the frequencies adults ignore. They started taking the long way home from school to avoid the road past the Vance place. They whispered in the playground about the sleeping lady and her cold babies. In the spring of 1889, a group of boys dared each other to go up to the house. Tom Miller, the bravest of them, crept up to the porch. He peeked through the keyhole. He came running back, pale and shaking. "What did you see?" the others asked. "A boy," Tom stammered. "A boy in a suit. He was standing at the top of the stairs. He was looking at me." "Thomas?" "Yes, but his face, it was blue, and he was dripping." "Dripping what?" "Shadows," Tom said. "He was dripping shadows." The adults dismissed it as fancy, but then the adults started seeing things too. John Abernathy, the coal merchant, passed the house one evening at twilight. He swore he saw a light in the kitchen window. Not a lamp. A glow. A pale, sickly phosphorescence that moved from room to room. And the humming. On quiet nights when the wind died down, people living a mile away claimed they could hear it, a low, rhythmic vibration. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was organic, like a hive of bees, or a lullaby sung by 1,000 voices under the earth. Livestock in the neighboring farms began to act strangely. Cows refused to give milk. Horses kicked their stalls apart. Dogs would stand at the edge of the property line and howl for hours, their hackles raised, staring at the empty house. Sheriff Graves tried to ignore it. He told people it was the wind. He told them it was settling timber. But he couldn't ignore the dreams. Every night Graves dreamed of the bedroom. He dreamed of pulling back the quilt, but in the dream the children weren't dead. They sat up. They opened their mouths to speak, but no words came out, only moths. Thousands of white moths pouring from their throats, filling the room, suffocating him. In 1890, Graves decided he had had enough. He couldn't arrest a ghost. He couldn't shoot a memory, but he could destroy the vessel. He petitioned the town council for an order of demolition. Public safety hazard, he called it. Structurally unsound. The council agreed immediately. They wanted the stain gone too. On a clear morning in October, Graves rode out to the house with a crew of men. They brought axes, sledgehammers, and kerosene. "Tear it down," Graves ordered. "Burn what's left." The men went to work, but the house fought back. The wood was unnaturally hard. Axes bounced off the siding as if it were stone. Saws dulled within minutes. And accidents happened. A man slipped and broke his ankle on the porch steps. Another was struck by a falling shingle that cut his cheek to the bone. The men grew fearful. "It doesn't want to go," one whispered. "It's just wood," Graves shouted, grabbing an axe himself. He swung at the front door. The blade bit deep. A dark, viscous fluid oozed from the cut. Sap? Or something else? They doused the structure in kerosene. Graves lit the match. The fire didn't roar. It hissed. The flames were strange, streaked with green and violet. The smoke that rose was black and heavy, refusing to dissipate, hanging over the valley like a shroud. As the walls began to collapse, Graves heard it. The humming, it rose in pitch, becoming a shriek, a sound of metal tearing, of glass shattering, and then the roof fell in. The house imploded. The men cheered weakly. It was done, but Graves wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking at the cellar. The collapse of the floor had revealed the foundation. And in the corner of the foundation, exposed by the fire, was a hole, a dark, gaping mouth leading down into the earth. It wasn't a root cellar. It was a tunnel. Graves remembered Sarah's words. "There is always a cellar, Sheriff. You just didn't dig deep enough." He ordered the men to stay back. He took a lantern and a rope. "I have to check," he said. "I have to know." He lowered himself into the hole. The air was freezing cold, despite the fire raging above. It smelled of ancient earth and that sweet, cloying scent of preservation. The tunnel was narrow, carved from the limestone. It went down deep into the hill. Graves walked for what felt like miles, though it must have been only 100 yards. The tunnel opened into a cavern, a natural cave. Graves raised the lantern. The walls were covered in scratches. Thousands of them. Marks made by fingernails. Marks made by small hands trying to dig out. And in the center of the cave, sitting on a flat stone, were 3 objects. 3 dolls. They were crude things made of sticks and mud and scraps of cloth, but they were dressed, one in a scrap of a suit, One in a scrap of a blue dress, one in a scrap of white lace. They were arranged in a circle facing each other, and in the center of the circle lay a book, a ledger. Graves picked it up. It was damp, swollen with rot, but the writing was legible. It wasn't Sarah's handwriting. It was crude, childish. "We are cold. Mama put us to sleep, but the earth woke us up. We are hungry." Graves dropped the book. He backed away. The shadows in the cave seemed to move. The stalactites looked like teeth. He heard a giggle, a child's giggle, coming from the tunnel behind him. Graves ran. He scrambled up the rope, clawing at the dirt. He burst out into the sunlight, gasping, covered in mud. "Fill it in," he screamed to the men. "Fill the hole. Bury it now." They bulldozed the earth over the foundation. They piled rocks on top. They planted trees. They tried to seal the wound. Graves resigned a month later. He moved west. He died in a sanitarium in Oregon, raving about children in the walls. Meanwhile, 50 miles south, Elara Vance lived on. Greystone Asylum was a place of forgotten souls. Elara was a model patient. She never caused trouble. She never spoke of the past. She spent her days in the sewing room, mending sheets. But the nurses noticed things. They noticed that Elara never slept. At night, she sat by the window of her cell, staring north, toward Raven's Hollow. They noticed that she talked to the empty air. "Eat your supper, Thomas. Don't tease your sister, Mary." And they noticed the dolls. Elara made dolls out of scraps of thread and lint, tiny figures. She hid them under her mattress. She lined them up on her windowsill. In 1925, a young doctor named Dr. Aris took an interest in her case. He was a modern man, interested in psychoanalysis. He wanted to understand the mind of a filicide. He interviewed Elara. She was an old woman now, her hair white, her hands arthritic. "Why did you do it, Elara?" Aris asked. "Why did you kill them?" Elara looked at him. Her eyes were still clear, still terrifying. "I didn't kill them, doctor," she said. "I planted them." "Planted them?" "Like seeds," she said. "You put a seed in the cold ground so it can sleep through the winter. And then, when the spring comes, it grows, it changes, it becomes something new." "And what did they become?" Elara smiled. "They became the roots. They became the trees. They are the forest now." Aris felt a chill. "But the house is gone. The sheriff burned it." "The house was just a shell," Elara said. "The roots are deep. They go everywhere, even here." That night, Dr. Aris heard a sound in the hallway, a humming. He opened his door. The corridor was empty, but on the floor outside Elara's cell was a trail of wet, muddy footprints. Small footprints. Leading to her door, he unlocked the cell. Elara was gone. The window was barred. The door had been locked from the outside. There was no way out, but the bed was empty. On the pillow there were 3 dolls and a note written on a scrap of sheet in charcoals. "Spring has come. The flowers are blooming. We are going home." A search was launched. They checked the grounds, they checked the river, they checked the woods. Elara Vance was never seen again. The story of Elara Vance should have ended in 1925 with her disappearance from the Greystone Asylum. It should have been filed away as a tragic case of madness and a subsequent escape. That likely ended in death by exposure. But stories like this, stories that bleed into the soil itself, do not end. They simply wait for a new narrator. For 70 years, the site of the Vance homestead in Raven's Hollow remained undisturbed. The forest reclaimed the land with a vengeance. The white trees that Sheriff Graves had noted in his final days grew into a thick, impenetrable grove. Locals called it the Bone Orchard because of the color of the bark. Hunters avoided it. Birds avoided it. Even the wind seemed to die down when it reached the edge of that particular tree line. But in 1998, progress came to Raven's Hollow. A developer from Boston bought the valley with plans to build a luxury ski resort. He looked at the maps, saw the undeveloped land, and saw dollar signs. He didn't know the history. He didn't care about the legends. In June of that year, a survey team was sent in. Among them was a young archaeologist named Dr. Sarah Bennett. She was there to ensure compliance with state heritage laws, checking for indigenous artifacts or historical foundations before the bulldozers rolled in. Sarah was a woman of science. She believed in carbon dating, soil stratigraphy, and peer-reviewed papers. She did not believe in ghosts, but Ravens Hollow was about to challenge every belief she held. On the third day of the survey, Sarah's team found the foundation. It was buried under a century of leaf litter and moss. The stone was blackened by the fire of 1890, but still solid. As they cleared the earth, they found the outline of the house, the parlor, the kitchen, the porch, and then they found the cellar. The hole that Sheriff Graves had ordered filled had settled over the decades. The earth had sunk, creating a depression. When the team began to excavate, they found that the fill dirt was loose. It came away easily. 10 feet down, they hit the tunnel. "It's a limestone fissure," Sarah's colleague Mark said, shining a flashlight into the gap. "Natural formation." "No," Sarah said, running her hand along the edge. "Look at the tool marks. This was widened. Someone dug this." They lowered a camera into the hole. The feed on the monitor showed a narrow passage, slick with moisture descending into the dark. "We have to go in," Sarah said. They set up a winch system. Sarah and Mark descended. The air in the tunnel was cold, impossibly cold for June. It was 80 degrees on the surface, but down here they could see their breath. They reached the cavern, the same cavern Sheriff Graves had found 100 years earlier. It hadn't changed. Time had preserved it like a tomb. The scratch marks were still on the walls, thousands of frantic grooves, but the dolls were gone. Instead of dolls, the floor of the cavern was covered in roots, thick, pale roots that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic movement. They grew out of the walls, out of the floor, twisting together in the center of the room to form a shape that looked like a cradle. Sarah approached it. She felt a hum in her teeth, a vibration in her bones. Her Geiger counter, which she carried for geological surveys, started clicking. Low-level radiation? Or something else? She leaned over the root cradle. Inside, nestled in the tangle of pale fibers, were 3 objects. They looked like chrysalises, pods made of a translucent organic material. They were the size of small children. "Mark," Sarah whispered, "record this." Mark was frozen. "What are they? Fungi? Slime molds?" "I don't know," Sarah said. She reached out a gloved hand. She touched the surface of the largest pod. It was warm, and then it moved. A ripple passed through the membrane. Sarah pulled her hand back. "It's alive!" They took samples, they took photographs, they retreated to the surface, terrified and exhilarated. They thought they had found a new species. A biological anomaly. They sent the samples to a lab in Boston. 2 days later, the results came back. The DNA was human, but it wasn't just human. It was modified. It showed signs of extreme adaptation. The cellular structure was denser, capable of surviving freezing temperatures, capable of hibernation. It was the DNA of Elara Vance's children. But how? They had died in 1888. Sarah went back to the historical records. She found the trial transcript. She read Elara's words. "I planted them, like seeds." Sarah realized the horror of the truth. Elara hadn't poisoned them to kill them. She had given them a mixture that slowed their metabolism to a near stop. She had put them into a state of suspended animation. And then, somehow, she had moved them to the tunnel, or the roots had come up and taken them. The soothing syrup wasn't just laudanum. Dr. Webb was an amateur botanist. He experimented with local plants. Had he accidentally brewed something that triggered a dormant gene? Or was the land itself the catalyst? Sarah returned to the site. She had to know if the pods were viable, but when she got there, the site was swarming with military trucks. Men in hazmat suits were sealing the perimeter. A black helicopter hovered overhead. "National security," a man in a suit told her. "You need to leave." They confiscated her equipment. They erased her hard drives. They threatened her with prison if she spoke. Sarah left, but she couldn't let it go. She spent the next 10 years digging into the history of Raven's Hollow. She found old diaries. She found folklore about the Pale people who lived in the mountains before the settlers arrived. She realized that Elara Vance wasn't the beginning. She was just part of a cycle. The valley had always been a place of preservation, a place where death was not the end but a change of state. In 2008, Sarah received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a journal, the lost journal of Elara Vance. It had been kept by a nurse at the asylum, passed down through her family until it reached someone who knew Sarah was looking. Sarah read the final entries. Entries written in the asylum on scraps of paper. "They visit me at night. Thomas is so tall now. His skin is like bark. Mary sings with the voice of the wind, and Leo. Leo has learned to walk through walls. They tell me it is time to come home. The roots are ready. I will go to the tunnel. I will lie down in the cradle, and we will sleep until the world is quiet again." Sarah closed the book. She understood. Elara hadn't escaped the asylum. She had been retrieved. The military never found the pods. When they excavated the cavern, it was empty. The roots had withered. The chrysalises had hatched. So where were they? Sarah moved to a cabin near Raven's Hollow. She set up trail cameras in the woods. She waited. In the winter of 2010, during a blizzard that shut down the entire state, her camera captured an image. It was grainy, black and white night vision. But the shapes were clear. 4 figures walking through the snow. 1 tall figure leading the way, and 3 smaller ones following. They weren't wearing clothes. Their skin was white, blending with the snow. They didn't leave footprints. They moved over the surface of the drifts like smoke. They stopped in front of the camera. The tall figure turned. It was a woman. Her hair was long, white as bone. Her face was angular, beautiful, terrifying. Her eyes glowed in the infrared light. She looked at the lens and she smiled. It was Elara. She was alive. She had changed. She had become something elemental, a guardian of the winter and the children. They were with her, changed too, evolved. Sarah destroyed the camera. She burned the image. She knew that if the world saw this, they would hunt them. They would try to dissect them. And Elara had protected her family for 100 years. She deserved her peace. Sarah packed her bags. She left Raven's Hollow. She moved to Arizona, to the desert, as far from the snow as she could get. But sometimes on cold nights she hears it, the humming, a low vibration in the air, and she wonders, are they confined to the valley, or are they spreading? Is the silence of Raven's Hollow a quarantine, or is it a colony? The developer never built his ski resort. The company went bankrupt after a series of accidents. Equipment malfunctioned. Workers vanished. The land was deemed cursed and sold back to the state as a nature preserve. It is now a protected wilderness area. No camping allowed, no hiking after dark. The official reason is bear activity. But the locals know. The bears avoid that valley. The wolves avoid it. Only the trees grow there. White trees with dark leaves. And if you stand very still in the dead of winter, you can hear the earth breathing. You can hear a mother singing to her children. Sleep, my darlings, the winter is long, but we are patient. This is the true end of the story of the Vance family. They didn't die. They won. They defeated death by becoming something that death cannot touch. They became the winter itself. Thank you for listening. This journey into the dark history of Ravens Hollow is complete. If this story chilled you, please like and subscribe. Share it with those who love the unexplained. And remember, when the snow falls and the silence comes, listen. You might hear them, but do not follow the humming. Do not look for the white trees. Let them sleep.